Colne Valley Path is a 23-mile long-distance trail beginning in the Essex village of Great Yeldham and ending at the ancient Roman city of Colchester. Day 1 is 9 miles and heads out of the village, crossing open fields and countryside to the neighbouring village of Castle Hedingham, with its medieval timber-framed houses and fantastically preserved Norman castle. Continuing through more open countryside, the path encounters numerous hints of the old railway line that once passed along the valley floor. The path crosses through the Dean's Hall and Hepworth Hall estates before eventually arriving at the Essex town of Halstead. The Colne Valley Path begins here at the Great Oak in Great Yeldham, believed to be over 300 years old before being entombed in a case of stone. The path's meandering 23-mile route along the Colne Valley takes in numerous highlights including Castle Hedingham and Chappel viaduct, and ends at the ancient Roman capital of Colchester. Although the route can be walked in one long day, or even 2 shorter ones, I've opted for 3 days walking with varying lengths of 6 to 10 miles. Following the road through the village and away from the Great Oak, the path passes the Three Bottles pub before heading further up the road to a footpath into a small area of woodland. As you reach the other side of the woods, the path enters vast open farmland and gently maintains a height of around 65 metres above sea level. This added height allows for some rather lovely views over the upper reaches of the Colne Valley and is continued all the way to Castle Hedingham. Just before joining Kirby Hall Road near Castle Hedingham, a look to the south will highlight the Colne Valley Heritage Railway. The visitor attraction consists of a mile of track, a fully reconstructed station, signal box and railway yard. The line was originally opened to the public in 1863 and finally ceased operation in 1965 after being used as a freight line for 3 years. Just slightly further ahead is the village of Castle Hedingham, and as you approach you will see the towering Norman keep to the northeast. The keep was constructed around 1140 AD and is arguably one of the best preserved Norman keeps in England. Walls 11 feet thick support the rising tower to a height of 70 feet above the surrounding countryside, and likely replaced an even older castle from the early 11th century. The Colne Valley Path passes right through the village, taking a meandering route through the narrow streets up to the village church, which dates as far back as the late 12th century. After enjoying the medieval treats on show at Castle Hedingham, the path heads out of the village south to bypass Sybil Hedingham and eventually arrives at Alderford Mill. The current mill dates from about 1720 and was used to grind coarse wholemeal flour. Just beyond the mill, the path eventually joins the River Colne, which is followed until you reach Hull's Mill. The mill sits alongside the River Colne and dates to the 18th or 19th century. Historic records show a mill has been located on this site since 1086. Just as you leave the Hepworth Hall estate, the path is briefly interrupted by the A1124, which is crossed on the other side of the River Colne, and the path heads back into the surrounding marshes. The route eventually joins a path which runs parallel to the old railway line, which is followed for some way before skirting around a noisy industrial estate, keeping the River Colne as company. Just a few hundred metres further along, the path arrives at the bustling town centre and high street of Halstead. With shops, cafes and plenty of places to eat, drink and sleep, it's the perfect place to rest and plan the next day's walk ahead. The second day of the Colne Valley Path begins at the town of Halstead and heads away from the busy high street to join the riverbank path along the River Colne. The route towards Chappel follows hints of the old railway line, which once ran along the valley floor. The route passes close to the village of Colne before following the track bed towards the village of White Colne. The path continues to follow sections of the river before crossing open country estate to the end, near the spectacular brick viaduct at Chappel. Halstead is the biggest town visited along the route until Colchester is reached at the end of the last day. There are many places here to get breakfast, and with its good bus links, it's the perfect place to book 2 nights accommodation and use public transport at the end of today's part. The route heads away from the busy streets to the Halstead River Walk, a well-surfaced path along the flowing waters of the Colne. After passing a new housing and industrial estate, the path eventually arrives at the vast open countryside along the line of the old railway. These are the most significant signs of the industrial age since the section of railway walked yesterday, and there are more sections to come along the path today. Almost 3/4 of a mile of country lanes is followed, which passes close to the village of Colne. The village sits up on the hilltop to the north of the route and takes its name from the river and valley nearby and the Engane family, who were the principal family in the village between 1279 and 1367. It's shortly after Colne that the route follows almost half a mile of the railway bed once again, as the path heads straight for White Colne. It's possible that the tiny village of White Colne may have witnessed the earliest settlements in the Colne Valley, with archaeological evidence dating back to the Paleolithic era over 10,000 years ago. A short detour will take you into the village to visit local amenities, but the route actually continues along the Colne on its northern banks. Another crossing of the river takes you to the south side and follows the floodplains east to the village of Chappel. A vast estate is crossed with lush green pastures and the occasional view of the spectacular Chappel viaduct. As you cross the estate, the path passes close to Wakescombe Mill, a Grade 2 listed building dating back to 1840. Just near the mill, the route passes Viaduct Farmhouse, another Grade 2 listed building dating back to the early 16th century with considerable 19th century renovation. Next to the farmhouse is the beautiful Church of St Barnabas. The church dates as far back as the 13th century and given the special protection of a Grade 1 listing. Just around the corner is the perfect place to celebrate completion of the shortest day along the Colne Valley Path. The Swan Inn caters to all who pass through this area, with food and drinks served throughout the day. And close to here it is possible to catch public transport onward to Colchester or back to Halstead for an overnight stay before the final section of this lovely walk. The third and final day of the Colne Valley Path begins in the small village of Chappel and follows sections of the Essex Way east to Ford Street and progresses further along the River Colne to arrive on the edge of West Bergholt. Here the path crosses a large golf course and passes under the busy A12 to arrive at the western gateway to the ancient Roman city. This is the official end of the trail, but I'm continuing down the high street to visit the spectacular Norman Castle and nearby ruined priory before ending at the train station. Chappel is a rather unassuming village in North Essex, with one outstanding feature, the enormous brick viaduct. At 1,060 feet in length, it's the longest bridge in the region and one of the largest brick structures in the country. The viaduct stands at a height of 75 feet and consists of 32 semicircular spans, each 30 foot wide and made up of a total of 7 million bricks. Just out of Chappel, the Colne Valley Path joins the Essex Way, another long-distance trail that cuts right across the county. The way is followed for a little over 3 miles along the edge of the River Colne, past the village of Ford Street and up to West Bergholt, with plenty to see and enjoy along this stretch. Just as you approach Ford Street, the path passes around Mill Race Pillbox. The pillbox was built during World War II and was designed to cater for 5 light machine guns, 1 rifle and 6 men. The path continues along the riverbank for a short way before arriving at the busy A1124, which is followed for only a few minutes past some delightful timber-framed houses. A turn left takes you along the edge of a field with a gentle rise to the right. The path heads across this field and gains a little elevation for some lovely views over great swathes of the Colne Valley. After crossing the river and a minor road near Mill House, the route crosses a beautiful conservation area owned and managed by the Woodland Trust. This area is alive with all manner of wildlife, and time spent here is never wasted. West Berghull is largely bypassed, with the route heading southeast to cross a narrow brook and begin the final approach to Colchester. This final approach takes you through a large golf course and under the noisy A12 dual carriageway. Just beyond the A12 you may notice the route follows a bank and ditch hidden in thick woodland. This is Lexton Dyke, and a remnant of the defences constructed around the Iron Age settlement here in the 1st century BC. This is one of several defensive ditches in and around Colchester which date from the Iron Age. A final crossing of the River Colne leads you to the A133 and eventually into another local nature reserve called Hilly Fields before arriving at the remains of the Roman gatehouse. The Bhutan gate dates to around 200 AD and earlier than the Roman walls alongside. It remains the largest surviving gateway in Britain at 107 foot wide, but sadly much has been destroyed over time, with parts of it under the nearby Hole in the Wall pub. Located just behind the Roman gate stands another technological marvel. Jumbo Water Tower was completed in 1883 and soars to a height of 130 feet above the surrounding town. This spectacular structure was made from 1.2 million bricks and given a Grade 2 star listing. Colchester Castle is another historical site not to miss. Its impressive walls were twice their current height when construction was completed in the late 11th century. The keep was the largest ever constructed in Britain and the largest surviving example in Europe. The castle keep was also built on the foundations of an earlier Roman temple of Claudius dated to around 54 to 60 AD. This was the largest temple of its kind in Roman Britain and potentially represent the earliest existing Roman stonework in the country. Just around the corner is the last historical treat on the walk, St Botolph's Priory. The priory dates as far back as 1100 and was the first Augustinian priory in England. These fantastic historical monuments in the town centre create an awe-inspiring end to a lovely walk through the Colne Valley, and although not officially part of the route, they really add another interesting dimension. From its Norman keeps, Roman structures and spectacular Victorian engineering to the meandering wildlife-rich waters of the river, the Colne Valley Path has everything needed to inspire the imagination.